Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements. And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello.
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello, JD. I don't always throw the JD on there. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know today. Thanks for listening. I got 11 teams left in the Western Conference, and I want to do 2025 off-season previews for all of them. And I want this episode to be relatively fast-paced. And so my goal is to move through all these 11 teams in a couple minutes each. We're going to talk financial fundamentals, give you a sense of what these teams are facing as we hit late June, early July. And then this whole concept will be wrapped up. You know, I've been doing these off-season previews for several weeks now. I took a break to break down the 2025 WNBA draft results and sort of preview training camp rosters for the 13 teams in the W. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please check that out. I also, on my Substack, I published a very in-depth, data-driven article breaking down the lack of success that WNBA draft selections over the past 5 years, 2020 through 2024, the first 5 drafts of this present CBA agreement, very, very difficult for draftees to make WNBA rosters and to stick in the league. I would highly recommend checking that out if you have any interest in the future of labor in the WNBA and wanted a better sense of the disparity in the WNBA. Young players, young talent are really given a harsh treatment when they're trying to make the league. They are entitled to very small salaries on standard deals, but that's only if they play out the length of the contract on the WNBA roster do they get that money. That it's otherwise non-guaranteed. And so you see many, many, many cases where getting drafted in the WNBA does not translate to earning any money. $0 in career-based compensation earnings for many players. A few thousand or, $10,000, $15,000 in many other cases. And so check that out on my Substack if you want to learn more about that. But today, let's get going on the NBA. We left off in LA. So we're going to start first with the Los Angeles Clippers, LAC. We just saw that they were eliminated from the playoffs in round 1 in a rousing roundhouse kick of a victory for the home team, the Denver Nuggets, Game 7. That was a strange series. I thought the Clippers could have gone up 3-1, maybe even swept the Nuggets based on which team was playing best over the course of the first 4 games. But the Nuggets were able to pull things out. They have the best player in the world. Jamal Murray was a great number 2. And ultimately, the Clippers were not able to make enough stops throughout the course of a game. The Nuggets would just have those runs where they were able to build a lead, build a cushion, and the Clippers were playing from behind. And we saw that even in the now famous Aaron Gordon alley-oop dunk, game-winning dunk that we had never seen before in the history of the NBA, which, by the way, we still haven't seen an image of his fingers off the ball with the light off. So, kind of controversial. But with all that said, the Clippers, they were playing from behind in that one too. So they came roaring back. It was a great, great, great fourth quarter. But I think you could argue they didn't deserve to win the game. You could also argue that they did deserve to win the game because they played so well in the fourth, and the Nuggets, I just don't think the Nuggets were a better team, but they had the best player. They had home court advantage. They got it done. Let's talk about the Clippers. The Clippers have 10 contracts under team control for next year. They have 2 player options that they have to deal with, including James Harden, 3 veteran cap holds. They do have the Oklahoma City Thunder's first-round pick as a result of trades. So they have the number 30 pick in the first round. That's going to be a relatively small salary, about $2.7 million next year. And so all things considered, yes, they are over the cap for next season, but projected out with a 14-player roster, they actually have about $26.5 million in room from the second apron, $14.6 million from the first apron. So they have some optionality. Even if they were to make a trade where they received more salary and thus they hard cap themselves at the first apron, I think they would be okay. I think alternatively, let's just go through. They have Kawhi Leonard making $50 million next year. James Harden's player option for $36.34 million. That's going to be an interesting question. Does Harden opt out and negotiate a long-term contract to stay with the Clippers? Was this season enough of a positive where the Clippers feel like this Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and elite role players group can compete for a title again next year? And by the way, I say compete for a title again. Even if it was late in the game, the way the Clippers closed the regular season and the expectations coming into round one, the Clippers were a team where it's like, wow, this might be the second best team in the West, the second most well-rounded team in the West. I have a feeling the Clippers are going to want to bring this team back. They're going to want to bring Ty Lue back as coach and go for it. Maybe they can have a better regular season and get into the second or third or fourth seed so that they're not playing a team like the Nuggets, right? The fact that they had to play Jokic in round one and they had, the disadvantage of being the road team in that series. I think that if they could work out something with James Harden, maybe similar to the Draymond Green contract, where instead of Harden playing for $36.4 million next year, maybe his salary drops down to $32 or $33 million as a first year, and then you do raises from there, and it's a 3 or 4 year structure. Maybe what you could do is start James Harden at a higher number and decline the salary. That would be kind of creative, right? If James Harden had a certain amount of guaranteed money in mind, you could structure a $100 million contract over 3 years where he makes, 40 in the first year, and then maybe he makes 35 in the second year, and then it drops down to something in the low 30s or high 20s after that. There are some rules, right? You can't decrease the salary more than 8%. So if you're going to decline, there are some parameters, but I think there's a lot of creativity that they could use. I would expect him to be back. Let's see, Norman Powell, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Ivica Zubac on one of the best deals in the league, Derek Jones, Chris Dunn, all 5 of those guys have contracts for next year. Drew Eubanks, it's a team-controlled deal, a non-guarantee. He's probably going to be gone. Nick Batum has a player option for only $4.9 million. I would expect them to negotiate a different type of a deal where maybe he gets a little bit more money next year and the team gets to retain some control in year 2 or year 3, depending on how long the deal is. And then they have some, some players for the bottom of the roster that, may or may not turn into, anything. I don't know if they're going to want to bring Ben Simmons back, for example. I don't know that Amir Coffey or Kobe Brown figure too much into what this team is going to do next year. I think having the first round pick is a great asset for them. I could see them, drafting someone at 30 that is maybe like a 3 or 4 year college player that could come right in and contribute, as a specialist or a role player of some kind. But I would expect this team to largely stay the same, run the course, and ideally Kawhi Leonard in his age 34-35 season, hopefully he can emulate what he looked like to finish the year. And I think that is the silver lining, right? Is that for the first time since 2020, Kawhi Leonard was fully healthy and available to end the season for the Clippers. And so with that said, let's run it back and see, what can happen next year. I don't see a lot of trade possibilities either for this roster. I don't think it makes sense for the Clippers to aggregate Bogdanovich, Zubac, Jones Jr., and go big fish hunting. They don't have the draft capital either to make a big star trade. So I would look for the Clippers to be very, very similarly built a year from now. Next up, the Los Angeles Lakers, another team that was eliminated in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. They look a lot different now than they did when the season started. And so there will be major questions all summer long about how the Lakers approach building around LeBron and Luka, assuming that LeBron James comes back. The Lakers have 9 contracts under team control. They have 2 player options they're dealing with. One of them is LeBron James. They have 4 veteran cap holds. And so they're absolutely over the cap to a large degree, projected to be, somewhere like 35 million over the cap. And then when you talk about, the tax, they project to be in the tax by quite a bit. They were a repeater last year, so they do have the repeater tax issues at play for next year. And in the first full season of having Luka Doncic, I imagine that they're going to try to be as competitive as possible. So, I think that they're going to be a team that is dangerously close to the second apron. And depending on how they approach things, for example, I don't know that it makes sense for them to use the taxpayer mid-level, which is only a salary of like $5 million, if that is going to hard cap the team at the second apron. Clearly, as I think as a lot of people have memorized by now, they're not going to be able to make a trade where they get more money than they send out. They have $14.7 million in distance from the second apron projected right now. Let's talk this through. LeBron James is a player option of $52.6 million. He could absolutely opt out and negotiate more money on an annual basis. I would expect him to do that. I would expect him to, even if this is one last time, I would expect LeBron James to opt out. He would be entitled to negotiate either his max or 105% of what he made last year. In this case, I think that the max, which is like $54.1 million, I think that would be the higher of those two numbers. I'm not going to do the math on the fly. It's going to be a lot. And then I would expect him to negotiate either a second guaranteed season or another player option. Maybe the Lakers will hold out. Maybe the Lakers will say, hey, if you want 2 years, we'll give you 2 years. Got to be fully guaranteed. If you want 3, if you want 2 guaranteed years and a player option in the third year, maybe we talk about that. But I think that they want to go into this offseason. Luka Doncic is eligible for a $345 million max extension. That wouldn't start until the summer of 2026. And so Luka doesn't have to say yes. He's under contract for 1 year. Luka's paying attention. I assume he wants to play with LeBron. And LeBron should want to play with him. So then the real question is, if you're LeBron, what can you extract by opting out of your player option and going back to the negotiation table? But if you're the Lakers, you say, hey, LeBron, you want to finish your career here. You want Bronny to keep developing in LA. We have Luka Doncic. We want Luka to sign a $345 million extension. He's going to be paying attention to what we decide here at the table. So let's not be cute. We want to know exactly how many years you are going to play in LA. Let's not talk player options. We're not going to talk about team options either. Do you want a 2-year deal? Do you want a 3-year deal? I think that's where the discussion should be, because it's going to be a max salary. I don't think there's any way to talk LeBron out of a max salary at this point, and he's been good enough. He was good enough this past year to be an All-NBA consideration and warrant a max salary. So that's what I would expect. And then as you move down the roster, Rui Hachimura has another year at $18.3 million. I think the Lakers like him more than other teams do, so he'll be there. I'm going to skip Dorian Finney-Smith for a second. Austin Reeves, famously is on a bargain, only $13.9 million next year. He has a player option for $14.9 the following year. And I would guess that instead of declining that and signing an extension with the Lakers, he is going to want to play this year out and be a free agent in 2026. Just to throw one team out there, the Miami Heat project to have cap space in the summer of 2026. I'm sure they would love to make a competitive offer for someone like Austin Reeves. So, if you're Reeves, yeah, you could probably sign like a 4 or 5 year extension, guarantee yourself $90, $100 million. But because of the 140% rule, you're building this extension off of a bargain salary. You do the math, you project out. It's just not enough money relative to what Reeves projects to make as a free agent. So I would advise against a long-term extension for Reeves. Then the Lakers have a lot of salary where it's like, man, it's just very, very, I think, sort of representative of what the LeBron era in LA has been, where you just got a lot of vets who are making mid-level type money. And when you add it up, it's like, wow, like 11 for Kleber, 11.5 for Vincent, 11.5 for Vanderbilt. Like that's $34 million that the Lakers probably wish they could do something else with. You added another 18 for Rui, and don't even get me started. I mean, the Lakers have let a lot of really talented players come in and out of their locker room that could be on this team. So I think the Lakers are going to continue to make some big decisions. They obviously, after reneging on the Mark Williams trade, there's a lot of expectation that they will try to trade for a different center, maybe with a similar package. But the player I wanted to hone in on for a minute was Dorian Finney-Smith. So Dorian Finney-Smith was a great trade acquisition for the Lakers before the Luka Doncic trade. He was obviously very pivotal for the Lakers in the playoffs, was part of that group that played just about every minute of the second half in this series against the Timberwolves. And, I think the thing with Finney-Smith is there are not that many forward-sized players with his length and versatility, his ability to hit a three-point shot. And so as I was tweeting about this past week, and shout out to Zach Lowe, obviously, the best in the business, he was talking about on his podcast, it would be a lot of fun to be the agent for Dorian Finney-Smith and negotiate some new money. And I couldn't agree more. What you could do is decline the $15.4 million player option for next year. And then as I was just referencing with Reeves, the 140% rule comes to mind. So if you negotiated 140% of what Dorian Finney-Smith made this past year, so that's 14.924. You multiply that by 140%. That's how you get a year one salary of 20.9. So the most money that Dorian Finney-Smith could earn in an extension next year is $20.9 million. And then from there, the Lakers could add 8% raises based on that first year. So what does that look like? 8% of $20.9 million is $1.672 million. And so if you want to do this at home, you just add that $1.672 million to every new year of the contract. And so 20.9 in year one, and then year two ends up being like 22.5 and change. The year after that, you add that 8% raise. Year four, add an 8% raise. And then year five, you could build out a contract that's 5 years, $121.184 million, or about 121.2. That's a huge deal, life-changing money for Dorian Finney-Smith. He would definitely say yes to that. If you're the Lakers, I don't know if you're super pumped up about that, but they don't really have a better option. They can't replace him. Dorian could just walk as a free agent if he declined the player option and left. And look, if you gave, that would be, about a $5.5 million pay raise next year for Dorian Finney-Smith relative to what his player option would have been. The Lakers, they would get that much closer to the second apron. They would lose about half of their space between where they are today and the second apron. But I think they're going to be able to fill out a roster, especially with minimum contracts. They have a non-guarantee for Shake Milton at $3 million that they could just elect to keep if they want an inexpensive player with some experience off the bench. I don't know how good this team is going to be next year. I don't know how viable their title contention is next year. They're certainly going to be a 50-win threat if they do things right. So very, very, very excited for what the Lakers will do. Let's move to the Memphis Grizzlies, a disastrous ending to the season. I have more thoughts than I have the time to share on this team. I'll just say at a high level, I think I've become convinced that the John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane trio, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I think that as a trio, it's like 3 of the top 50 players in the league. Triple J at his absolute best is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I guess he won the award. All right. So at his absolute best, he's the Defensive Player of the Year. But his foul trouble, his injury concerns, I just don't know that I would want to be in the business of giving Triple J his next contract, which is going to probably be a $200 million contract. Desmond Bane is a very talented guard wing, one of the better shooters in the league. He's had his own injury concerns, and he makes a lot of money. He's already north of $40 million a year. My apologies. He's at $37.7 million next year, $39.446 the following year, 42.2 in 2027, 44.9 in 2028. So, Bane is on a very expensive deal, about to hit his prime, really like Bane. And then there's the John Morant of it all. John Morant is on pace to make even more money over the next few years than Desmond Bane. His availability is a huge concern. And so, on the one hand, Memphis still has some flexibility despite having 3 higher paid players. Jaren Jackson Jr. is on the books next year for 23.4. So they don't have to do anything with Triple J. Alternatively, if he did not accept a contract extension offer, then I think I would officially be on notice as the Memphis Grizzlies that, hey, you know what? He is likely to test his free agency in 2026 and leave. And so we should probably think about making some moves. But I wouldn't even start with him. Like, I would be okay going into next season with Jaren Jackson Jr. on an expiring deal because I know that I could always trade him before the trade deadline. I think there's a big, big problem here where I don't think John Morant has enough trade value relative to his talent where you can get a good offer for him today. And I think that his trade value is likely to go down over time, right? More injuries, more off the court questions. I've thought about would Orlando Magic trade most of what they got for John Morant, or would they consider doing like a Franz Wagner for John Morant swap? The answer is probably no. And Orlando has been a team desperate for a star point guard for years and years now. So if a team like Orlando, or if a team like Charlotte, or if a team like Chicago, if those teams would rather stay on a different course than invest in John Morant, I don't know where the big trade offer is coming from. I don't think there's a Western Conference team that would make a big trade for him. Maybe Sacramento. Is Domantas Sabonis for John Morant a good idea for either team? Probably not. Moving down the roster, Brandon Clark is the 4th highest paid player on this team. He has another couple years at $12.5 million. I'm a huge fan, but he struggles to stay healthy, missed time this year. He's going to be age 29 next year. Then they have some cap holds for Marvin Bagley, Luke Kennard. I don't know if those guys make sense to bring back or not. John Conchar on a $6.1 million deal is harmless. Santi Aldama is going to be an RFA. I don't think he has shown enough to be like, you have to bring this guy back at any price. I think that there are teams that might look at him as a stretch big that could help a rebuilding roster. And they could probably, make a $9, $10, $11 million annual value type offer. I don't think Memphis should match that. I think Memphis should probably let him go. They have Jay Huff on the cheap, Scottie Pippen Jr. on the cheap, Gigi Jackson, Jalen Wells on the cheap, Vince Williams Jr., I don't think I mentioned him yet. Zach Edey is only on a rookie deal, so year 2 is just a $6 million salary. There are things that are going well for this team. Notably, Memphis does not have their own first-round pick. They don't have a first-round pick in this upcoming draft, but they have a lot of young talent, like I said, on cheap salaries. So they should be okay in terms of young talent that they can develop next year. But I got to be honest, I look at this team as sort of outside of the playoff mix, more of a play-in team at best. And I would strongly consider breaking up this core. So they could be even worse than that next year. Let's keep it moving to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're in round 2 of the Western Conference playoffs. We're going to see how this year finishes for them, because I think that might affect how they look at their options. Of course, they're a team that's built around Anthony Edwards. Very, very, very good time to be in the Anthony Edwards business, as he projects to be one of the top 5 to 10 players in the league for a very long time. Just led the NBA in three-pointers made. Financial fundamentals here: 10 contracts under team control, 2 restricted free agents, and then 2 players with player options. They do not project to have cap space. They're about $23 million over the cap, but they have some flexibility. They might be able to avoid being in the repeater tax next year. But yeah, I think in all likelihood, they're going to probably go over the tax. And then the question is, how close to that first apron do they get? Right now, about $11.6 million in breathing room. They have most of their roster locked up for next year. Rudy Gobert, $35 million salary. Notably, he was at $43.8 million this past year, but he dropped that salary down to $35 so that he could add a $36.5 million salary in 26. And then in 27-28 year, he has a player option for $38. So he was able to give himself some long-term money. And he gave Minnesota some very, very helpful savings, not just in the tax, but in terms of room from the second apron. Anthony Edwards' salary jumps up to $45.6 million next year. He's already making the 30% max. Julius Randle has a player option for $30.9 million. He's been playing very well. He will be an age 31 player next year, so I wouldn't be shocked if he wants to test free agency and get some years. But I actually think the best pathway for him to do that would be to work out something with Minnesota so that he declines that 30.9 player option, and maybe he signs something like 25 a year for 3 or 4 years. I think there's a version of things where Minnesota is willing to guarantee him, 9 figures, a huge payday, maybe the last great payday of his career, if that annual value goes down. And notably, he was at $33.1 million this past year. So the salary is already on its way down, declining. But I think if you're Randall, this is your chance to say, hey, I played well in the playoffs. I'm clearly a critical piece of this rotation. How about we lock in an annual value of 26, 27 million, and we spread that out over 3 or 4 years? I think that could be a win-win for both teams. Honestly, it could be a deal that looks similar to Jaden McDaniels, who, of course, is on a long-term deal, signed for the next 4 years, and next year it's only going to be $24.9 million. Naz Reid has a player option for 15. He will absolutely be opting out of. He is a free agent. I think that to some degree, Minnesota might be in a situation where they have to decide between Randall and Naz Reid. But then the real question is, how expensive is Naz Reid? Because if Naz Reid is all of a sudden in the high 20s, low 30s per year in terms of money, then the real question is, do we like Randall or Naz Reid better? Because at a certain point, the cost is prohibitive. I already went through, they're facing a repeater tax bill next year. They don't have significant room away from the aprons. And so Minnesota's going to have to probably make a decision. Which player in a vacuum do we want more? And then alternatively, if we were going to sign and trade one of these players, what would that return look like? I don't know what Julius Randle's trade market looks like. I think Naz Reid would have a very healthy trade market, but I wouldn't want to lose him. And of course, Naz Reid is the younger player. So we'll see what happens there. Dante DiVincenzo is just under $12 million a year next year. He really came on as the season played out. I really like him as a backcourt mate for Anthony Edwards in the long run, especially as Rob Dillingham is still developing. Dillingham, of course, on a rookie deal for the Wolves. Conley, also another guard in their rotation. He has 1 year left at $10.8 million. That could very well be his final year in the league. So we'll see. My guess is that he'll finish out his career in Minnesota. Things have been going well. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is another guard wing in this rotation. He is in need of another contract, and I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like for him. For example, he was making less than the taxpayer mid-level, $4.3 million. I think he well outplayed that. So if it was as simple as Minnesota offers the taxpayer mid-level, which for next year is $5.684 million or $5.7 million, that would be a pay raise for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but I don't think he wants that deal. I think he wants more than that. And even if you were able to really blow it out, like let's say, just using round numbers, if you started him at $5.7 million and you gave him 4 years, that deal would be something like $30 million in new money, a little less. No, actually, I think it'd be over 30, but with 8% raises. But if Minnesota uses the taxpayer mid-level, then they are hard capping themselves at the second apron, which in their case might be okay. Obviously, it's so punitive to be spending that much money that if you can stay under the second apron, you should. All of this to say, Minnesota is in one of the tougher situations of any team. They also don't have any tradable first-round picks. They cannot trade a first-round pick this summer. So I have a feeling that Minnesota is going to look strikingly similar a year from now, but only because they have limited options. I think the real questions are, do they have to choose between Randall and Reed? What does it cost to keep Nickeil Alexander-Walker? And then I think they're going to probably exercise most of these team options and non-guarantees at the bottom of their roster just so that they can fill out their team. And then they would have some salaries that they could use in trades. Although, when you're in Minnesota's case, these salaries of like $2.7 million for Terrence Shannon, $2.4 million for Luke Garza, like you can't really aggregate those salaries. So it's only so valuable, but they do need to fill out a roster. So what would solve Minnesota's problems the most is winning the championship this year. Because if they win the championship this year, then they don't have to say sorry about anything. And then, I think in their case, they probably would bring back everybody. Even if their tax bill was huge, they would have all those earnings from the championship, all that home court revenue, ticketing revenue. So we'll see. We will see. Speaking of we will see, next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, one of the most hard luck franchises in NBA history. Not exactly sure what this team is going to do because there's a lot of evidence that they should blow things up. They have 12 contracts under team control next year, 2 cap holds. So they could pretty much bring everybody back. Zion Williamson has a $39.5 million salary. CJ McCollum, $30.6. DeJounte Murray, who will probably miss the entire season, has a $31.6 million salary. Bruce Brown is going to be a free agent. I don't imagine he'll be back in New Orleans. He's probably the most obvious player to leave. They have Herb Jones for $13.9 million, Kelly Olynyk for $13.4, Trey Murphy starting his new contract at $25 million next year. Jordan Hawkins is on a bargain, $4.7. Yves Missi, $3.4. Jose Alvarado is a rotation level player at $4.5. So I've just named 9 players who, whether they're injured or not, are all NBA quality players who have, guaranteed money, more or less. Zion's contract is complicated, but, by and large, all of these players are locked in for next year. I mean, the Pelicans were one of the worst teams in the league. They're projecting to have, a top 4 pick in the draft. And yet they barely have any room for the tax. They had to do a lot to get under the tax last year. They were only $662,000 below the tax last year. And so they're going to have to work hard again to stay under the tax next year. They're only $10.4 million projected away from the first apron. So they actually have to really be careful. If they were to do a trade where they received more money than they sent out, boom, now they're hard capped to the first apron. That it's going to make it almost impossible for them to maneuver next year. I think it's going to be a lost season. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams again in the league next year. And probably, if I had to guess, they're going to have to be patient this summer because I don't think they're going to have very good trade options. But I think once the season gets rolling next year and they start falling in the standings, I would expect them to move CJ McCollum to a contender for, maybe 2 or 3 second round picks. I would expect them to move Kelly Olynyk for a couple second round picks. I think they have some larger questions about Zion Williamson that are, it's an imperfect calculus. It's hard to know what the right move is. They probably should just play out next year, and then you still have 2 more seasons with Zion under contract. But next year might already be a lost season when you consider that DeJounte Murray is taking his $31.6 million into the dirt, missing next year with an injury. So not a great time to be a New Orleans Pelicans fan. We'll see how the draft shakes out for them. A team in a much better situation, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And not much to say about them. I mean, I'm just going to do this because they obviously could win the championship this year. They'll be one of the favorites next year. If you look at their cap sheet, they just straight up have 15 players under team control. SGA for $38.3 million next year is a relative bargain when you consider how valuable he is. Hardenstein's at 28.5, Lou Dort's at 17.7, and then between $18.1 million for Caruso. Right, so he's at 18.1, Dort's at 17.7. And then they just have a range of players that make between like $5 million and $13 million. Isaiah Joe, Chet Holmgren, Aaron Wiggins, Kendrick Williams, Kason Wallace, Ousmane Deng, Nikola Topic, Jalen Williams still on a rookie deal. And then they have a few players who are even less expensive than that. They, of course, have multiple first-round picks next year. As of today, they're projected to have the 15th pick, the 24th pick, and they could land in the top 10 or so, depending on where Philly is in the lottery, because it's the top 6 picks. So if the pick lands at 7, OKC gets it from Philly. So we'll see. We'll see exactly where those first-round picks end up. If those first-round picks materialize, then they have a roster crunch issue where they already have 15 players under contract for next year. And then if they get 2 or even 3 first-round picks, then they're going to have to trade some of those guys to make room. Alternatively, they could use the first-round picks for like a draft and stash and delay the process. But I think especially where OKC is in the timeline, already competing for championships, I would expect that this is the summer that they finally make a consolidation trade. They're not a tax-paying team. They have room from the aprons, so they could aggregate and basically combine 3 or 4 contracts, trade 3, 4, 5 first-round picks, and make a very big offer for somebody. So, we'll see what they choose to do. Very, very healthy cap sheet for the OKC Thunder. You know who doesn't have a healthy cap sheet? Phoenix Suns. They have 10 contracts under control. Well, they have 10 contracts signed for next year. Not all of them are under their control. Looking at you, Bradley Beal. No trade clause. They have 5 cap holds. They are already projected to be $53.9 million over the tax. Over the salary cap, which is projected $28.3 million over the tax. And they're already projected to be over the second apron, well over the first apron. And, looking at a repeater tax penalty of something like $65.5 million, meaning that their entire salary plus tax bill is somewhere between $300 and $400 million for next year already. Now, alternatively, if Kevin Durant is going to be traded, they can absolutely structure that trade so that they lighten their tax bill, create some flexibility, But, I mean, you look at their cap sheet, here's the problem. Those numbers that I just gave you were based on projecting, they only have 9 standard contract players likely for next year. They have 5 minimum roster spots from a year ago that they would have to replace. They don't have really any tradable contracts. Like Royce O'Neal for $10.1 million is somebody that they might be able to move. Cody Martin is on a non-guarantee $8.7 million. They'll probably let him go just so that they don't have to pay the additional tax penalties on a deal like that. Maybe they bring Nick Richards back, who's on a non-guarantee for $5 million. $5 million is a low enough salary where, it's only so much higher than the minimum, so the tax consequences aren't terrible. But this is what happens when you have 3 players who are all set to make over $53 million on the team. So they got to trade Kevin Durant, and then we'll see how they pivot and fill out their roster. They do have a first-round pick, the number 29 pick, coming from Cleveland. So that is a silver lining for them. They will be able to add a first-round salary. It's a guaranteed first-round salary. They can add a player like that, even though they're well over the tax because of first-round exceptions. So I like that for them. They're going to draft somebody at 29. They're going to be able to play right away, develop in Phoenix. Hopefully it's the beginning of a new era for them. But yeah, otherwise I would not. I would not want to be in charge of cleaning this mess up. We will see. We will see. Next up, Portland. Portland Trailblazers, 12 contracts under team control, 1 restricted free agent, 1 player option, and 1 cap hold. They are well above the salary cap, but I do actually find that this roster is filled with tradable deals, although I do think that in the long run, they made a mistake giving Jeremy Grant such a big contract extension. Like, I think it's pretty clear his trade value is negative. Set to make $32 million next year, $34.2 in 2026, and then he has a player option for $36.4 million in 2027. Probably gonna pick that up. Probably gonna say yes to that. DeAndre Ayton, one of the worst contracts in the league next year, $35.6 million, but 1 year left, and quite honestly, he's only age 26, turning 27 next year. Like, I could see them moving him. Maybe somebody will take a flyer on him. Anthony Simons at $27.7 million is a pretty good deal. Denny Advia, $14.4 million next year, and then a declining structure for 2 years after that. That's one of the best value deals in the league. He's only going to be age 25 next year. Robert Williams at $13.3 million. He gets hurt a lot, but for a team in Portland's position, I think, you start the year with him. Maybe he even is your starting center if, in fact, he can be healthy. During training camp, he missed training camp last year. But if he can be your starting center and really play his way back into shape, turn heads, like maybe you could trade him for, maybe you could trade Robert Williams before the deadline next year for like a low first-round pick grade. I think that would actually be like a pretty ideal outcome. Matisse Thybulle has a player option for $11.6 million. He'll probably pick that up because things haven't gone super well for him over the last couple of years. But, then that's done. Basically, they're projecting to have like $54 million in cap space in 2026. And so the Western Conference is loaded. I don't think there's any hurry or any rush for the Trailblazers to start competing next year, as long as they're showing signs, right? Like, they played pretty well after the All-Star break this past year. You're building a fan base slow and steady. They like Chauncey Billups as the head coach. They gave him a new deal. I think they're going to go into next season playing with a lot of confidence. The veterans are going to try to play for their next deal or to get traded to a contending team. The young players will continue to develop. Scoot Henderson, still on his rookie deal. Donovan Clingan, rookie deal. Shaedon Sharpe is on the last year of his rookie deal. He'll be eligible for a rookie scale extension in the summer and the fall. So we'll see if they can come to an agreement. My guess is that Sharpe is willing to bet on himself as a free agent in 2026. I mean, if you're Portland, you would probably have to give him something like, the Patrick Williams contract in Chicago comes to mind, right? That was 5 years of $18 million per year flat. So a $90 million deal. If you adjusted that for inflation and offered Sharp $100 million guaranteed, I mean, look, the vast majority of people on planet Earth, when offered $100 million, should say yes, assuming that the terms of the deal aren't like violating your values as a human being, right? Someone says, we'll give you $100 million for your labor, you're probably better off saying yes. So, we'll see. I don't know. I don't know that Sharp is a $100 million man for this Portland front office. Like that's a decision that they'll have to decide. But I think that could be structured in such a way where it's a pretty good deal long term. I think the Trey Murphy contract comes to mind as well, right? Trey's going to make $25 million starting next year, and that goes up slightly so that I think in year 4 it's a $31 million salary. The total value of the deal was something like, $120 million, I want to say. So something like that could get done. I just don't know if Sharp has shown enough signs. And there have been some injury concerns as well. So I like this Portland team. They have some interesting names at the bottom of their roster on the cheap. And like I said, they can have a ton of cap space by the summer of 2026. They also project to have a top 10 pick in this upcoming draft. So we'll see. We'll see what Portland looks like a year from now and what kind of moves they can make. All right, a few more teams left here. Sacramento, they made a big deal for Zach LaVine, and so now he is at the top of their salary cap sheet at $47.5 million. Domantas Sabonis next up with $43.6. DeMar DeRozan has one more guaranteed season of $24.8. So, right away, you have some expensive guys at the top of your team. Malik Monk is in year 2 of a big deal, $18.9 million to be, one of the better rotation players at his position. Isn't necessarily a starting guard, but someone that, you really like. Jonas Valanciunas is on the team next year and that has a non-guarantee the following year. Keegan Murray, last year of his rookie deal, he is eligible for a rookie scale extension. So very similar to the conversation I was just having about Shaedon Sharp. And I referenced like Trey Murphy's deal. I think Keegan Murray is someone who has done enough and has been patient enough with this Sacramento franchise where they would probably have to offer him 9 figures for him to sign it in October. Otherwise, he could go into restricted free agency in July of 2026, which his position type as a small forward, power forward, good shooter, good defender, those guys get paid. So if Sacramento wants to keep him, they should probably offer him $100 million, maybe more in October. So we'll see if that gets done. Really, it was disappointing Devin Carter was injured for his rookie year. So I'm excited to see what he does in year 2. As a former lottery pick. This Kings team, they are going to be over the cap and they have some breathing room from the tax. They made a tax. They were under the tax last year. I think that they could navigate things where they avoid the tax next season. And I don't project them to be that great of a team. There is a pretty big question about this Domantas Sabonis relationship. Does he want to be there? Does the team see a future with him as their best big man? Does Zach LaVine and Domantas Sabonis as a partnership, does that guarantee you much of anything, especially in the Western Conference where it's so hard to compete? So, I'm curious to see how Sacramento approaches things. I would not be shocked if they make a big trade. DeMar DeRozan, what's his trade market? Are they able to flip his $24.8 million salary with a non-guaranteed season in 26? Maybe they can find a veteran team that wants to take 1 year, wants to roll the dice on 1 year of DeMar DeRozan, knowing that they can part ways with him the following season. Sacramento, they're kind of stuck in the wilderness right now. So we'll see exactly where they go. They made a big trade with the San Antonio Spurs, our next team up, and sent De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs. De'Aaron Fox will be the most expensive player on the Spurs next year for $37 million. $27 million for Devin Vassell, $17.5 for Keldon Johnson, $19 for Harrison Barnes. Victor Wembanyama, only $13.4 million next year. Stephon Castle, $9.6 million. So those two rookies being such high draft picks, Wembanyama and Castle, they actually make pretty good money right away. You got $7 million for Jeremy Sohan, 4.9 for Malachi Branham. And so this roster, is already starting to get expensive. They do have first-round draft picks in this upcoming draft. They're going to be picking somewhere, or somewhere in the top 10 after the lottery shakes out. And then they also are receiving Atlanta's pick. So they're going to have 2 picks in the lottery. 2 picks in the lottery, which is pretty impressive for where they are in their rebuild, having Wembanyama. And then and actually two rookies of the year in a row with Castle. So they're building well. I think Chris Paul, as a veteran, he obviously already elected to be here once. I have a feeling he'll come back for a negotiated price to finish out his career. And yeah, I really like next year. We'll probably see Fox, Vassell, Wemby, Castle, and then we'll see who that 5th starter is. We'll see exactly what their bench looks like. They're going to have plenty of maneuverability under the aprons to get things done. I mean, as of today, they project to have $29.8 million in room under the tax. So they probably are going to be fine to avoid paying any tax penalties next year. And that's important, right? Because if you're building around Wemby, the longer you can delay paying into the tax, the better, because you don't have to start that clock. Obviously, the repeater tax is very punitive. So they want to stay nimble, flexible in their cap maneuverability. I trust in their ability to do that. Shout out to Greg Popovich, transitioning into the role of team president. 29 years as head coach, one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport, one of the best leaders in the history of basketball. Shout out to him. And the last team up here, Utah Jazz, they are in a kind of forever rebuild, it feels like. They're paying Larry Markkinen $46.4 million next year. And for 3 years after that, I would be pretty shocked if they trade Markkinen just because he feels like a hand-picked guy. They want him to be the face of the franchise, and they want to sort of develop the roster around his skill set as a sweet shooting 7-footer, pretty unique player. He's only 28 years old, so I get it. I think John Collins will absolutely be coming back on that player option, $26.6 million. His agent has an interesting decision because, you could opt out and then try to sign a long-term deal that guarantees the client more money over time. But Collins has had such a tumultuous few years, and he's really been stuck in the wilderness ever since he got to Utah. So I just don't trust that the market will yield anything close to $26 million a year. If I was him, I would rather have John play out the season on a $26.6 million salary. And then if you play well, you'll get some sort of contract in 2026. And even if it's a huge pay decrease, there's a big difference between going into free agency as someone who just made $26 million a year, and then you negotiate wow, you're only offering me 13. That's half. That's half of what I made last year. That is a bargaining position to be like, you know what? My client's going to say no because my client's not going to accept half of what he made next year. Oh, well, what if we offer you 16 million instead of 13? Now, if you're the agent, you at least feel like you were able to claw back some money, for the client. So that would be interesting. Colin Sexton for $19.8 million. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Jordan Clarkson for $14.3. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Taylor Hendricks, Cody Williams, Keontae George, all interesting young players on value deals. Some other young players, including Walker Kessler, I really like for $4.9 million. Isaiah Collier's a great young rookie, a good young rookie on a cheap deal. So they have a lot of young players. They're going to have some draft picks coming into the fold. Could win the lottery, could have the number 1 overall pick. And then they also have projected the number 21 pick coming from Minnesota. So I really like where this team finds themselves in terms of having options. They're going to be active in trades. They don't have any real tax concerns or apron concerns. So they should be a strong player in the trade market. They are not going to be a good team next year. They are absolutely at least one full year away. So, we'll see. If they get Cooper Flagg with the number 1 overall pick, maybe they're closer than we think. But I would say Utah is a pretty safe bet to miss the playoffs next year. And with that, I was able to, speed through in just about an hour all the rest of my Western Conference teams. And so this is what I'm forecasting moving forward, y'all. So I am now kind of freed up from these off-season previews, from these like long-term forecasts. And so starting on May 12th, you should expect some more topical conversation, some episodes that are produced in a way where I'm able to touch a more diverse array of topics. If you have any questions or anything that you really want me to address, I have not recorded that episode yet. So by all means, email me at joemags32@gmail.com. Hit me up at @thatjoemags on social media. Comment on my Substack. However you want to get the questions to me. If you send a pigeon or a bird of some kind, you don't have my address, so don't do that. Use the internet, use technology. But I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for supporting me, and be on the lookout. I have some interesting updates that are in the works that I will absolutely be posting on the LinkedIn soon enough. So stay tuned, and thanks for supporting the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. Thanks for being a member of this larger basketball community. It's the honor of my life to be a basketball person and to know so many great, talented people, to be inspired by and motivated by so many hoopers and, women and men who are dedicated to the same culture, the same community that I am. With love, with grace, Joe Mags, signing out. I don't love it. I don't hate it. 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 I don't love it. I don't hate it.